So let's go to the phone lines right now. Let's bring in Dave Cohen, longtime play-by-play voice of Georgia State. Dave, we appreciate you making some time for us today, and give us a little quick synopsis on Lucas Taylor. What is Syracuse getting in Taylor, who was the leading scorer for you guys last year?
Well, appreciate you having me on. You know, it's unfortunate that we only got to see him for 1 year, but he had a really good year with us because, you know, in this collegiate landscape that we operate in with the transfer portal and with the NIL, you know, rosters are turning over almost on an annual basis. At least that's been our situation here. So a year ago, Lucas comes in to Georgia State after transferring in from Wake Forest. He only played in 12 games with the Demon Deacons. So, you know, at that point, go back to the beginning of the season, I'm sure our coaches had a little bit more insight than the radio guy did. But, you know, he certainly turned the corner with regards to upping his game. Again, from playing in only 12 games at Wake Forest, this past year for us, he started 30 of 31 games. He was our leading scorer at about 15 points a game. That put him ninth in the Sun Belt Conference in scoring. Pretty good rebounder, averaged 3 rebounds for us. He had 7 games in which he scored 20 or more points. A really, really good 3-point shooter, especially when he would, when the basket would enlarge, and as we would say, he would start to see it really good and get into a rhythm. He had 7 games in which he scored 20 or more points. Pretty good 3-point shooter. Obviously, I'm sure that's one of the aspects to his game that Syracuse was looking at. For us, he was 35% this past year, 64 of 181, and about an 80% free throw shooter. So, you know, I was at Georgia State has just started some of their summer workouts, so I went over today because we have so many new faces on the roster.
Right.
Gives me a little bit of a running head start. Well, I had a chance to talk to our head coach after the practice, and, you know, I mentioned to him that I'd be, you know, coming on your radio show, and just to add a little bit to it, I kind of said, you know, to our head coach, Jonas Hayes, what is it that you liked about Lucas, and what is it that we're going to lose? You know, what are we going to miss with regards to his game? And just to kind of paraphrase, you know, extremely hard worker. And that's evidenced by the fact of, you know, when you come from Wake Forest, where you really were not a part, you know, a huge part of the game plan, again, having only played in 12 games and then coming here and starting 30 and being our leading scorer, you can see, you know, all of his hard work and training in the off season prior to this past season. You can see what kind of a player he became from what he was at Wake Forest to what he became at Georgia State. Is the Sun Belt the ACC? No, but it's a pretty good group of 5 mid-major basketball league. But, you know, our head coach said he loved his work ethic, one of those kind of guys, first in the gym before practice, last guy to leave the gym after practice. And, again, you know, Syracuse is getting a guy who upped his game from point A to point B, from Wake Forest to Georgia State. And I can only hope that for Lucas's sake, because he's a really, really nice kid, in the times that, you know, I interacted with him and interviewed him, that he'll up his game again to the next level from playing at Georgia State in the Sun Belt Conference and being our leading scorer, and heading up to you guys with the Orange and upping his game to whatever that next level is and becoming an impact player for you guys at Syracuse.
Yeah, we certainly hope that as well. When he hit the portal, did you think, I could see him going up to the Power 5? I think he's ready to make that leap. Like, did Syracuse make sense when you first saw that, okay, that's where he's going next year?
Well, you know, we've lost, as I was telling your producer, we've lost a number of players, as you know, a lot of schools have, to the Power 5 in both football and in men's basketball. When we got to about 2/3 of the way through the season, I can remember telling, I don't forget if it was the guy, one of the former players that works color with me on our broadcasts, and it's like, you get a little bit, what's the word, as far as anticipation go, but a little nervous anticipation that because he was having such a good season with us, for the most part, he was our leading scorer. You know, who of the Power 5s, you know, whose radar is he all of a sudden on? when we get to the end of the season, whenever that point comes. For us, it was after the Sun Belt tournament. So, yeah, I mean, we could kind of see as we got to about maybe midway point, two-thirds of the way through the season, that he would be somebody, again, ninth in scoring in the Sun Belt. He'd be somebody who would be on Power 5 head coaches' staff's radar for when the season would come to a close. Hey, this is a guy that we may want to look at, we may want to approach and see if there's an interest in transferring and playing at the Power 5 level.
I was reading some quotes from him, Dave, about making the decision to come to Syracuse, and he said, look, I was asked to be a scorer at Georgia State, 14.5 points per game, led them in scoring, but I have more to my game than just that. How much do you think he can be valuable in other areas? Because, he's not going to need to score 15 points per game at Syracuse. Is he a good passer? You mentioned he's a solid rebounder. It seems like he's got good size for his position, but what do you see in terms of his all-around game?
Well, again, talking to our head coach this morning in anticipation of talking to you, again, they loved his work ethic. They loved his intensity on the defensive end of the floor, so he'll hopefully be an impact player, not just on the offensive end, but on the other end as well. He was also good at times in, getting into the paint, getting to the rim, making some noise in the paint area. He didn't, I would not necessarily paint a picture of him as just a three-point shooter or just a perimeter shooter. His game, had a number of other aspects to it, and that's one of the things that we'll miss here as well. Not just his perimeter shooting. Certainly that helps in this world of the three-point shot that we all play in. But his game was pretty well balanced on both ends of the floor. And it depends upon, as compared to who he was surrounded with here at Georgia State. I'm sure it'll be, anytime you look at the ACC, they're a little bit bigger, they're a little bit stronger, they're a little bit maybe more skilled at some of those positions. So he's going to be surrounded by, obviously, a little bit different type of cast of teammates than he was here at Georgia State. We were not a particularly big team. We were basically 6'7", 6'8", across the front line. We weren't playing necessarily with 6'10", 6'11", 7-foot type players. He's going to see a little bit bigger, faster, stronger student athlete playing at Syracuse on a game night, game in, game night, game out basis than he saw playing in the Sun Belt. Although Sun Belt basketball is really, really good, really, really competitive, but he'll, again, if his game ups as it did from Wake Forest to Georgia State and now Georgia State to Syracuse, I'm sure that, again, he'll be in the gym quite a bit when he gets up there and, starts to get a lay of the land and starts to see how his game transfers into the Syracuse and into to the ACC level like that, I have all the confidence in the world he's going to be a pretty good player. But his role will change. He won't have to be, as you said, the leading scorer. He'll have to fit in to the game plan that your coaches put out there for him.
Do you think he'll be able to adapt, and maybe if he's needed to be a guy that brings the ball up and is running like a true point guard type of role and be more of a facilitator, do you think he has enough of that in his game that they could count on him to be a guy off the bench that can play basically the backup point guard spot for this team?
It's possible. He didn't really have to play that role that much here. We had our point guards. But, yeah, I could see him doing that. That may be one of the areas, the ball handling area, that he kind of focuses on once he gets up there and once summer workouts and then practice gets underway. Ball handling skills, he can, as we've said, he can obviously shoot the basketball. But I would say ball handling skills, and not that he doesn't have court awareness, but if you're going to play the point guard position, you really got to be able to see the floor in a little bit different manner than you do maybe if you're the shooting guard or if you're playing the three, which at times he did for us because, that was the situation at hand. But, I would say ball handling and passing skills would maybe be an area of focus for him once he gets up there and practice gets underway.
Jen, with Dave Cohen, play-by-play voice of Georgia State, Lucas Taylor has committed to transfer from Georgia State to Syracuse. So talking about Lucas Taylor, the newest addition to the Syracuse men's basketball roster. You mentioned he's a good shooter, Dave, 35%. watching some of his highlights, it seems like he's got a lot of range on some of these three-point shots as well. How often was he shooting deep threes and contested threes as well when he kind of started to get the hot hand a little bit?
Yeah, like you said, when he would start to get into a rhythm, I wouldn't say necessarily get it across half court and he was in range, but a good foot to foot and a half behind the three-point line was not anywhere out of question for him to be able to knock down threes. He's got, again, really good range, especially straightaway, top of the key, when shooting the basketball. So, yeah, as you guys have seen some of his highlights, we'll look forward to watching him a little bit, too, when we get a chance to see Syracuse on national television, just to see how his game has transpired from the Sun Belt, up there to Syracuse. It'll be fun to watch. But I think he'll be a really nice addition. Again, we were sorry to see him leave, but in this world of NIL and the transfer portal, the budget just wasn't there in order to keep him here in Atlanta.
Yeah. How much has that changed things for a school like Georgia State? We talk so much about the transfer portal up here, and we're all trying to wrap our head around it, but it's got to be a different animal when your best player every year is probably going to be hounded by the top programs. Like, how often now since the transfer portal has started, have you been in a position where a guy like Lucas Taylor is leaving the team?
Well, if you got a minute here, I'll just go through this. So as I was telling your producer, in 21-22, Georgia State was in the NCAA tournament playing Gonzaga out in Portland, Oregon, after having a pretty good season. And that team had a number of players on it that, got the extra year because of COVID. And it was a very, very experienced team. Just about the core group were all 3 to 5. I think there was even one 6-year kid on that team. You just don't have that anymore. And at that point, after the NCAA tournament, our head coach at the time, Rob Lanier, leaves Georgia State, goes to SMU. Of course, he's now at Rice now. But once the core group of that NCAA team dispersed, we brought in Jonas Hayes as our head coach. Right away, the cupboard was bare. He had to bring in 3 transfers and signed 1 high school kid. One of the transfers that he's brought in since, who came in from Xavier, transferred out after this past season, and he's now at Tulsa. The small power forward has gone completely full circle. He went from Gardner-Webb to Vanderbilt to Georgia State back to Gardner-Webb, where he'll play this season. It's just crazy. Lucas is now at Syracuse. Our other point guard went back to VMI. Our 6'10" forward center just recently committed to New Mexico State. And the reason I tell you that is because for the second year in a row, well, now Jonas is going into his 3rd season, the roster has basically turned over. And as I look, and I won't name names, but as I look at the roster this year, and I saw some of these kids this morning, transfer from UNC Asheville, transfer from Radford, transfer from Xavier, Missouri State. That's one kid who's on his 3rd school. Transfer from Iowa State, transfer from a D2 Caldwell University, transfer from Seton Hall, transfer from Northern Illinois. That is a bulk of our roster heading into this 24-25 season, and that is the world of college athletics that we live in this day and time.
Yeah, one of Syracuse's players, William Patterson, just transferred down, and it just came out he's going to High Point. But I think what gets lost a little bit is, in all likelihood, he's a guy that's probably going to transfer again. Like, I'd like to know the percentage of guys that transfer once. How often do they transfer a second time, especially when it's a player like Lucas Taylor who goes from power conference to group of 5 or a lower level school. His designs are to get back to power conference, and you have the ability to do that now. There's no sitting out or anything, so I'm sure you're dealing with that a lot.
Yeah, and getting back to Lucas, I mean, if you look at his transfer spots, as you said, okay, so he's from Raleigh. He starts at Wake Forest. As I mentioned when I first came on, he only played in 12 games, but he made a smart decision. Yeah. And I don't know what all entailed in that decision, but he comes to Atlanta. He plays for Jonas Hayes. He starts 30 ball games, practices hard, shows up, does what he's supposed to do, good leader on the floor, and he's able to take his game to a level that if he had stayed at Wake Forest probably would not have happened. So he transfers, like you said, Power 5 to Group of 5, really gets his game in gear, and then the opportunity, again, in the world of college athletics that we operate in now, he gets the opportunity, and I'm sure there was some financial considerations that were part of this decision, but gets an opportunity to go back to the Power 5 level, after coming off of a kind of season where he proved that he could play at a higher level.
Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating world of college sports, and I don't know how much it's going to change. I think we've just hit the beginning of it, and as we were talking about our last segment, Dan Hurley going to the NBA, you can understand why some of these college coaches with a year-round job are making that decision now. But, Dave, we'll let you go. Appreciate all your insight. Great stuff breaking down Lucas Taylor, and thanks for hopping on with us.
All right, Tim, thanks for having me on.
All right, that is Dave Cohen, play-by-play voice of Georgia State, and Lucas Taylor transferring over from Georgia State to Syracuse. Good insight there, and I do think as far as type of talent that Syracuse was trying to get to be a backup guard, they pretty much got as good as you can get. It's tough to find someone much better than Lucas Taylor. We'll see how it plays out, but encouraging stuff there, especially here and how much of off the floor and how much he is a hard worker and has the right attitude. So it seems like he's been saying the right stuff, and it seems like a good addition for Red and the Orange. We'll step aside for a little bit, come back here on ESPN Radio and QSportsTalk.com.
Q Sports